The Miami Dolphins were not searching for miracles anymore. They were searching for something that simply worked. After a start so frustrating that it felt like a recurring dream they couldn't wake from, Week 8 arrived like a quiet challenge, almost a whisper from the football gods. Change something, anything, or sink for good. And that's exactly what they did. The Dolphins, desperate, restless, willing to shake up every habit and routine, made one subtle but revealing move. Frank Smith, the offensive coordinator, left the booth and came down to the sideline. It didn't sound like a revolution, but somehow it felt like one. The energy that had been missing for weeks suddenly felt alive again, almost like electricity running through the cables of Hard Rock Stadium. There was nothing particularly dramatic about Smith's presence, no grand speech, no cinematic gesture, but the air changed. Players noticed. Coaches noticed. Even Mike McDaniel, who usually carries that calm, scientific energy, looked like a man who had finally heard something click into place. When the Dolphins beat the Atlanta Falcons 34-10, the score didn't tell the whole story. The 30-plus points, the dominance in time of possession, the balance between precision and aggression, those were outcomes. The real story sat beneath that surface, buried in the way the team carried itself. The sideline wasn't quiet anymore. It had rhythm, life, and noise. There was a different kind of communication happening. Not the kind that flows through headsets and monitors, but the kind that flows through eyes and small gestures. Frank Smith didn't need to shout. He was just there every second, grounded on the same turf as his players, feeling the pulse of every drive. McDaniel said later he hadn't planned it. It was a reaction to the week, to the way the offense had been rehearsing, to the way frustration had been brewing. He called Smith a solution man. And it fit, because that's what this felt like. Not a master plan, not an experiment, just a moment of clarity. The Dolphins didn't play perfect football, but they played connected football. The line moved with urgency. The receivers broke huddles like they were chasing something invisible, and the rhythm of the snaps felt less mechanical, more alive. That's what McDaniel meant when he said football could be complicated or simple, depending on how you look at it. He wasn't talking about schemes or formations. He was talking about the heartbeat, the simple, human part of the game that gets lost when everything becomes numbers and tape. Smith's decision, or maybe McDaniel's decision for him, to be on the field might never be proven as the cause for the turnaround, but everyone felt it. You could see it in Tua Tagovailoa's body language. His movements weren't tight anymore. His shoulders didn't sag between series. He looked at Smith like you look at someone who's reminding you why you started doing this in the first place. And that's what this team needed. Not a new playbook, not a miracle, but a heartbeat reset. A reminder that the game can still be about energy, about one man's tone echoing through an entire sideline. Tua said after the game that having Frank there kept the guys in it. That he pushed, corrected, encouraged, and steadied them without overcomplicating things. And it wasn't about fancy leadership or motivational speeches. It was just consistency. Someone breathing the same air, reacting in real time, reading the looks in players' eyes. There's a strange psychology to football that outsiders never quite understand. Sometimes all it takes is one change in physical presence, a coach stepping down from the booth, to shift the whole emotional gravity of a team. Maybe it's because players can see you bleed with them. Maybe it's because you're no longer a voice in their ear. You're a shadow in their space. That's what happened with the Dolphins. The numbers back it up. No turnovers, just 2 pre-snap penalties, nearly 38 minutes of possession. But numbers don't measure relief. They don't measure how it feels when the tension finally cracks open and air rushes back into the lungs of a team that's been suffocating. McDaniel talked about the week of practice, how it wasn't just strategy, but attitude, how communication had been off, how small habits like breaking the huddle had turned sloppy. He saw something shift midweek, a small discipline that turned into momentum. You could tell he believed it because he didn't speak like a man who had found a formula. He spoke like a man who had seen a spark. By Thursday's walkthrough, they were running to the line. Literally, every rep carried urgency, as if they collectively decided to stop waiting for confidence to return and just play fast again. It wasn't glamorous. It was repetition and grit, the kind of stuff no one outside the building notices. And then Sunday happened. The Dolphins didn't just win, they exhaled. They looked free for the first time in weeks. There was laughter on the bench. There were nods, small fist bumps, that quiet kind of celebration that happens when belief starts to come back, piece by piece. Defensively, something clicked too. Anthony Weaver stayed on the sideline, as always, but there was a sharper edge in his unit. They played like they had enough of being predictable. Atlanta couldn't find rhythm because Miami didn't give them one. It was the kind of defensive performance that says, "We've had enough," without saying a word. So when people try to analyze whether Frank Smith's move to the field mattered, the truth is, it didn't need to matter statistically. It mattered emotionally. It shifted the temperature. And for a team that had been ice cold, that's everything. McDaniel admitted the season had reached a point where they had to start asking tough questions about who they were, how they responded to pressure, who would step up when things went sideways. That's not a coaching cliché. That's a human crisis. And it played out in real time against the Falcons. Frank Smith didn't reinvent the offense. He reconnected it. Sometimes teams don't need to be told what to do. They need to feel that someone is still right there with them, eyes wide open, matching their heartbeat. That's what Smith brought. You could see it when he leaned into conversations with Tua between series, pointing, listening, not over-talking. You could see it when he stood near the O-line, arms crossed but calm, like a steady current in a storm. That calm spreads. It's contagious. And when that happens, the plays start working again. Passes start landing. Drives start staying alive. Suddenly, the same players who looked lost a week ago look like they've remembered who they are. When the Dolphins hit the 30-point mark for the first time all year, nobody cared how. Nobody asked for analytics. They just felt it. That rush that comes when a team realizes it's not broken after all. It's hard to describe how much of football lives in the invisible, the timing between breath and movement, the unspoken trust between coach and player. You can't quantify that. You can only feel it. And Miami felt it. McDaniel's words after the game weren't polished. They were raw, full of small pauses that hinted at relief. He said he was proud of his guys, proud of how they responded to Frank, proud of how they finally executed. It sounded simple, but that's the point. Simplicity is underrated when chaos becomes the default. And that's where the Dolphins were, knee-deep in chaos, trying to swim their way out. The record said 1-6 before this game, but records lie about what's happening inside a locker room. A record doesn't show how tired a team is of its own reflection. When Frank came down to the sideline, it wasn't some genius adjustment. It was more like an act of faith, a small reminder that leadership doesn't always happen from above. Sometimes it walks beside you. The win over Atlanta didn't erase the season's struggles, but it gave the Dolphins something far more valuable: rhythm. For the first time, they looked like a team moving to the same internal beat. And that's not something you can fake. The next test, Baltimore, a far tougher opponent, loomed large. But no one in that locker room seemed afraid of it anymore. There was a sense of quiet confidence, the kind that grows in the aftermath of rediscovered belief. Because once you remember that connection, it's hard to forget it again. This game didn't just reset a scoreboard. It reset the pulse of a season. It reminded them that adjustments aren't just about formations or play calling. They're about emotion, about chemistry, about reestablishing the thread between coach and player that gets frayed when losing takes its toll. Frank Smith didn't plan to be the story. But sometimes, the smallest moves ripple the widest. A coach leaves the booth, steps onto the field, and suddenly the silence breaks. Players lift their heads. The rhythm returns. And for the first time in too long, football feels like football again. No one outside the locker room will ever fully understand the weight of that week. How close they might have been to unraveling. How tense the meetings had become. How every eye had started to look for something, anything, to hold on to. And then, quietly, they found it. Not in a new play. Not in a speech. But in proximity. In presence. That's the story of Week 8. Not a tactical masterstroke, but a human moment. A small shift that became a spark. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something real again in Miami.